Serious, nurses and doctors have ridiculed. What's your weirdest, scariest paranormal stories that took place during work? Did a rotation in a burn unit. There are tons of stories that go around, but I'll share my favorite. A pimp lit one of his prostitutes on fire, and she immediately bear hugged him, causing them to both suffer pretty severe injuries. Unfortunately, hers included an inhalation burn. They both were being treated in the same ICU but on opposite ends. Weeks later she ends up coding and passes away, and after about 30 minutes as things start to quiet down, a guy starts screaming from his room, "Get her out. Get the goddamn itch out of my room." Worked in a nursing home long-term facility for multiple years. Personally hadn't experienced anything too crazy apart from mystery call lights, call bell system going off, no buttons lit up, no rooms lit up. System would have to be reset from the electrical room to clear it. Hearing doors close shut, toilets flushing, faucets running. These were by no means commonplace. Other staff had some more direct experiences though. Apparently in one hall a little girl would occasionally be seen walking. This had been reported by multiple staff as well as patients. A staff member was sitting out in her car during night shift when some woman who knocked on her window and quickly disappeared. The next day she was discussing this out loud with the oncoming shift when someone pulled out a picture from old files based on the description provided. Apparently, it was a match to a former patient that had passed away at least 10 years before that staff member was hired. I used to work in a nursing home as both a CNA and an LPN. And while nothing too crazy happened, there were definitely things that happened out of the ordinary. I remember one time after someone had died, I was cleaning up her body and the door to the room swung wide open even though it had been firmly latched. Nobody was there. It gave me the creeps. There were instances of furniture being moved, lights turning on and off by themselves, and toilets randomly flushing by themselves as well. I also remember I had one resident one night who asked me to make sure I closed the door to the closet that was at the end of her bed, and she told me that when it was open that woman kept going in and out of it all night and it kept her awake. There is probably some medical explanation for this, but still the weirdest thing I've seen as a nurse so far. We had a very robust, confused old lady on our floor. Her room was in front of the nurse's station so we could keep an eye on her, and had one of our nurse's aides as a sitter too. She was always fighting, kicking, trying to get out of bed, very restless and agitated, as some patients I've had before can get before death. One day we were called into the room as her heart rate was going down and she lay still with her eyes open. It was 30, 20, then flatlined. We checked for a pulse and did not find any. She was a DNR so we did not attempt resuscitation. We close her eyes, prepare to get the body bag and call the family. The sitter remains in there to start getting the body ready. Less than 10 minutes later she calls us back in. The old lady is at it again, hitting, kicking, trying to get out of the bed. She came back to life. Honestly, we found the situation hilarious, and I still have never seen any patient come back like that on their own. I think she made it out of the hospital too. I was working at night and one of the patients died while I was in the room. We tried everything to revive this person but it didn't work, so after doing the papers and everything I went to another place in the hospital, and I swear to God that this patient who I saw dead touched my right arm. I think that I have never cried that much in my life. A ward I worked on once had a patient who was a psychic medium as a patient. We had a bit of a laugh with her as she was on the ward for a while. She'd had a stroke which affected her mobility, and she would do readings for the staff etc. from time to time. I took it all as just a bit of fun until one evening when she pressed her nurse call buzzer and told us to go check on a patient in a side room as he was dead. We went to check and sure enough found that the gentleman had died. Later on we asked our psychic patient how she had known, and she told us she had seen him coming out of his room obviously distressed. He realized he had died and had to explain to him what had happened and help him to pass over, go to the light dark. Now I am not a believer but that gave me the creeps. I worked in a pediatric hospital and had always heard that the 4th floor right outside our oncology unit was haunted. I worked 312s normally but would pick up overtime and picked up a night shift. I was working in the NICU which happened to also be on the 4th floor but on the opposite side. The oncology unit had a staircase that was a short cut down to the cafeteria which was on the 2nd floor. At about 3 AM I was ready to take a short break and wanted a cup of coffee from the cafeteria, so I decided to take that staircase. I walked through the automatic double doors and saw a kid skipping down the hall. I called out to him as I was afraid a little kid had snuck out of a patient room. As soon as I called out to him, he turned and in the blink of an eye totally vanished. A lot of other nurses and docs had seen the same little kid skipping in that same hallway. Of course I chalked it up to just exhaustion and didn't really think about it much after that. But you are damn sure I didn't use that hallway at night ever again. I'm a nurse. I've witnessed quite a lot with Alzheimer people. They often develop their own scenarios in their own head, often accompanied by vivid hallucinations. Once during night shift, I heard a woman scream in fear. Checking on her, she managed to climb into her wheelchair in pure panic, wanting to flee her bedroom, asking what was wrong. She thought the building was on fire. Now what's important to mention here is, people often make claims that people are just crazy or dreaming badly or something. But this is not the case. People with hallucinations have been found to actually see, hear, smell, etc. something when their hallucinations occur, as the same locations in the brain are stimulated as if they would get real impulses. That woman actually saw fire. She actually smelled fire. She didn't just make that up to be crazy. It's what her brain told her was happening. And she was in real panic for her life. And the same applies to when those people see someone else in their room. When they want me to guide someone out of the bedroom who isn't actually there, seemingly standing right behind me, and it makes no sense to discuss with them that no one's there. To them, someone is there, and you better do your best effort of improvising to guide that someone. Even if it's no one outside, play along, and they'll be fine. This, to me, is the scariest thing at work. They see something you don't. We've actually had a room sprinkled with holy water several times by our pastoral care due to the amount of deaths we've had in the same room. Okay, I'm a nurse, but this did not happen to me, but several other nurses who worked at these units. There is a little girl who haunts the burn unit of a large military medical treatment facility in the US. She has been seen by both staff and patients. Haunts may not be the correct term, but she has been witnessed by several. Second, I used to work at the old Walter Reed Army Medical Center. In the old one that moved back in 2011, there was a VIP ward. I believe it was Ward 72. Any retired general officers would stay there, along with any higher ups in the govt. Think Secretary of State and other cabinet officials. There was also a room for the First Lady and President. This ward is private, locked at all entrances and very nice. It is furnished with very high-end furniture and a lot of it was donated by MRS. Mamie Eisenhower, the wife of President Dwight D. Eisenhower. Well, my friend who worked there, the ghost of Mamie Eisenhower, is very particular about anyone staying in her room. And if anyone did sleep in that room, she would yank off the bedsheets. My friends also said decorative pieces would randomly fall off table or fly off the walls when they were the only ones up there. Mamie would also apparently page the supervisor, who would call the ward back to a very confused nurse as to who paged them. Edit. I floated up there 2-3 times during my time there. My friend was on with me and told me all of this. I didn't believe her, so I went and sat in the room where Mamie would mess with people. I fell asleep, but sadly nothing happened that night. One of the rooms we have is obviously having something of a haunting. A man in a gown gestured one of the techs to come in. She went in and he was gone. 1 week earlier a female PT was asking to get a different room because a man wouldn't leave her room. We just thought it was some sort of delirium. Multiple others have seen him too. I've worked in a small family-run nursing home for 6 years as a nurse aide. It was an orphanage before it became a nursing home. And unfortunately, before being shut down, the orphanage had a history of severe abuse and neglect. Unfortunately, it's not gossip, the owner herself has told us. When residents get close to death, they always see a little girl. One of my patients, a very alert gentleman, he knew all our names and was very alert and oriented. I was passing dinner trays and saw that he had his back turned and was talking and laughing in the corner. I knocked and asked him who he was talking to, and he chucked and said this little girl came into my room. She was scared. He died 3 days later. About 6 months later, had another patient screaming about a little girl grabbing his feet and she needed to leave him alone. He died that night. She's come up over the years, it's always the same thing, they see her and then they die. Other co-workers have had the same experience. It's very unsettling. Sorry for grammar errors. Something I've always struggled with and am working on it. Back when I was a paramedic in Oakland, I was taking care of an elderly gentleman in the back of my ambulance. He looked up into the upper corner of the ambulance and said, "It's okay Lulu, I'll be with you soon." His daughter was with him and told me that Lulu was his wife who died 20 years earlier. A few minutes later he went into cardiac arrest and passed on. I worked as a med tech at an assisted living facility. One day a resident, I'll call her Margaret, suddenly passed away and her family left all her belongings in the room that night, including her pendant, to call the staff for help. The next night Margaret's neighbor called the staff because someone was talking in the room next door and keeping them awake. We brushed the resident off knowing that Margaret's room was empty. About an hour later Margaret's pendant started going off from her empty apartment. I was the only one willing to go turn it off, so I walked into the room and it was freezing cold in the middle of summer. The air conditioning was off. Suddenly the bathroom door slammed as I was turning off the pendant light. I locked the door and ran back to the nurse's station. We forced one of the older male staff members to go check out the entire room and he claims the door was still locked when he got down there and no one was in there. I am a labor and delivery nursery nurse. Mostly it's call lights alarming from rooms that are completely empty. Sometimes it would coincide with APX, the time of death on another unit, or be the anniversary of a fetal demise. However, my creepiest, we have a button to push after a delivery to play a lullaby over the PA system announcing a birth through the hospital. One night no one was even in the same room as the button and the lullaby started playing. It did that twice, then we unplugged the entire thing. It still went off once more that night. And again a few days later despite being entirely disconnected. That was a few years ago and no one ever heard it do that before or since. We were on a night shift, sitting around the nurse's station and talking about weird things that had happened. One of the HCAs was in a side room once doing last offices, and the lights flicked on and off twice. Calls bells going off when there was no one about to press them. Hearing a cough when there was no one there, etc. etc. As we were talking, there was a pause in the conversation and very clearly we heard typing from the keyboard at the doctor's desk, which was just round the corner from us. I stepped round the corner to see who it was, as usually the doctors would check in with us before sitting down, just to say hello and to see if there were any jobs needing down. So I looked round the corner after hearing the keys being tapped as if someone was typing, only to see no one there. Was very freaky and we had to change the convo as we all felt too uncomfortable after that. This is probably going to get buried. When I was a nursing student up on an IQ floor, I was hanging antibiotics in my patient's room when I heard an audible "hey." I turn around and there is no one else in the room. Mind you, my patient was intubated and sedated, so there's no possible way it was them. It was a woman's voice as well, so I thought it was my preceptor. I go back out to the nurse's station and I asked my preceptor if that was her in the room trying to catch my attention. She told me no, and I've never seen someone's eyes get so big. Apparently the room I was in has had the most paranormal sightings and activity out of all the rooms on the unit. Sightings as in shadows sitting in the corner of the room, voices being heard and curtains being flung violently across the railings. No one ever told me about this room prior to my preceptorship, so it just added to everyone's beliefs it was haunted. I'm an IQ nurse. A patient's son rang the hospital at 11 PM on a Saturday night saying he was sure his dad was dying. His dad had had a severe stroke and was doing okay. Recovery would be difficult, but he wasn't expected to die and was pretty stable at the time. I was looking after him and he was a lot of work because he would try to get up but couldn't walk, so he'd fallen a lot. The son really wanted to come in, even though it's way past visiting hours. But you know, I'll bend the rules in a good cause. I figured, what the heck, it's his Saturday night. Come on in and sit with your dad. Patient died about 2 minutes before the son walked in the door. It was like a switch was turned off. He just died. The last thing he said to me was, "Am I bothering anyone?" I told him of course not. Even though he had some very frustrating behavior because of the stroke. The son just started crying and screaming. I knew it. How the heck he knew? We were all a bit freaked out. I am a nurse in a hospital and my patient was a well-known card reader in town. Not too unheard of in Louisiana. I had actually gone to her about 10 years prior and she was eerily accurate. While caring for her for a few days, I walk into her room and she is unresponsive. She had been very lethargic all day, but now she was out. Her daughter is at the bedside and is trying to wake her up. I sternal rub her and inflict pain with no response and a very thready pulse. I call a rapid response. This woman then wakes up randomly and was full of energy within a 30-second span. She told me she was dead and watching me in the room the whole time. Knew exactly what happened. She said God told her it wasn't her time and sent her back. She went home a couple days later and she is still doing card readings. She's in her late 80s. This was an odd experience. I'm a nurse in the PACU and was on call during a big ass snowstorm. I didn't want to drive home and risk getting called back in. So I stayed at the hospital that night on our little couch in our break room. I dozed in and out throughout the night, but I got caught in some state between wakefulness and sleep and I ducking swear to God I felt this malevolent being in the room with me at one point. It was super dark and I just felt anger from it. Like this unbridled hatred and rage. It was so heavy it was palpable. It almost felt like it was jealous I was alive. Anyway, it came down on top of me and pretty much collapsed through me and I just heard it cry in seething anger. Then, it was gone and I was fully awake. I've had sleep paralysis from time to time, but this felt different, and I have never felt such hatred from anything I've come across in my life, real or conjured. The cliche part here is this happened around 3 AM. One day a patient had to go to the X-ray which he was taken to in a wheelchair. About 5 minutes later the notification from the patient's room went off and me and my favorite work buddy went to the room. As we stepped in we saw that the room was empty and the windows were closed. Even the bed was missing in which the patient did not go to the X-ray. We both told a fully examined nurse and even she had no idea where the bed went. At the end we had to fill the room with another bed. I am still a nursing student but this was the most paranormal thing I witnessed so far. We had a little boy come by ambulance and was a toddler. His parents had put him to bed and he was with a cold. Nothing serious but developed tragically into more and he started coming in and out of consciousness. We had to do a rapid intubation and he ended up passing away a few days later. Before mom and dad made it to hospital he kept talking about his baby sister Hannah. Not soon after we had to life-saving measures. I was distraught because I had a son similar in age and a daughter named Hannah. Fast forward, approximately 2 years later, family comes in with sick infant. They remembered me. I did once I recalled their story, and I was their provider again. Their daughter's name was Hannah. It startled me and I recalled with clarity the boy speaking of his sister, whom I assumed was alive and at home. Nope, she wasn't even conceived yet, baby. Thankfully, went home with parents and doing well, but I'll never forget that little boy and his baby sister, Hannah. My aunt is a nurse and told me some stories, but this one stuck with me. There was an old lady who insisted on being strapped down at night in her bed. She told my aunt that there was a dark figure that was trying to grab her and take her out of the room, where she would die. My aunt and other nurses obliged and for the next few nights she would check on her and it would look as though someone was trying to pull her from the bed randomly while she slept. My aunt is then off and whoever is this lady's nurse does not strap her down at night. Nurses found the old lady dead, laying on the floor by the door, her hand stretched out past the door and into the hallway. I used to work hospice and had one patient who was on her deathbed. The family had all gathered around her to say goodbye, until the last remaining family member showed up. This patient remained resting in bed. Before anyone could say something, this patient sat straight up, eyes wide open, looked and pointed to every single family member there like she was counting them. Immediately after this she fell back in her bed and had died. Her daughter told me that she wasn't the most pleasant person and wasn't surprised that the patient would keep tabs on who showed up before she kicked the bucket. Seems kinda weird to keep a grudge into the afterlife. My mom used to do in-home care, not exactly a nurse. One day she was at a man's house feeding him his supper. She cleaned up, made sure the man was set up and said goodbye before leaving. He seemed perfectly normal to her. As she walked down the front driveway to her car she got a weird feeling. She kept walking until a random huge gush of wind stopped her in her tracks. She tells me she heard someone telling her to go back. She turned back and went inside to find that the man had passed. If she had left, he probably wouldn't have been found for a couple days. My mom used to work as a night nurse in the burn unit at a hospital in Dallas, PX. She told me that people would always talk about how the burn unit was apparently haunted. She wasn't really sure whether or not to believe this until a little girl came into the unit with horrific burns. The little girl did not always have parents stay the night with her, so my mom would try to check up on her pretty often when she worked. One night, my mom asked the girl if she ever got scared at night. The little girl responded, "No, I don't get scared because an old woman comes to read to me every single night and sits beside my bed while I fall asleep." This shocked my mom because there were no older women working in the burn unit at night and she would usually be the only person on duty during those times. It isn't that scary, but she always recalls it being one of the craziest things that has ever happened as a healthcare worker. This story is more about my mom. She's a nurse. She was walking through her nursing home and acting like it was a normal day, but it wasn't. People were looking at her really weirdly. After a couple hours, someone asked her what happened to her child. She asked what they were talking about. They said that everyone has been seeing a bloody boy walking beside her all day. Then she looked behind her and no one was there. And all day after that, people kept asking what happened to her child. When she got home, she looked up every incident at her nursing home. She found something about a murder, but I don't remember the whole story. Edit. I can't find anything. I tried to find more info online, but the only thing I could find I had to pay to read. My mother doesn't remember either. Oh, I have so many I don't know where to start. I worked in geriatrics, nursing homes, for years. So most of our patients died within a few years of being with us. Anyways, I had a new patient move into one of the rooms on my hall that my previous patient had just passed in. My new patient kept calling at night saying that there was this woman who kept coming into her room and trying to talk to her. At first I just passed it off on her being in her 90s and struggling with dementia. So I assured her that I would lock her door at night to make sure no one could come in. After about a week of this continuing to happen, I sat down with her and was asking what this woman looked like, thinking she may just be hallucinating her daughter or sister or something. And she proceeded to tell me that this woman had a pink robe on with blue fuzzy slippers and her hair up in curlers. And the women would come and sit at the foot of her bed, pat the new patient's feet and try to talk to her, but she couldn't understand what she was saying. I almost pissed myself. The patient that I had had in that room prior to my new one went to bed every night in her pink house robe, blue slippers and her hair in curlers. It stopped after about 2 weeks. Very young CNA here. I was doing clinicals at a nursing home when it happened. An older female resident had passed and no one had opened the window. For context, you open the window to A, let the smell of the body out, and B, to let the soul pass on. I'm only 17 and it was a little difficult to deal with a death this young. I was cleaning the hall she stayed on, and I thought I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I turned and saw her sitting in her chair, just staring at the TV. I looked away and looked back, and she was gone. I didn't tell anyone because hey, I'm young and dumb. No nurse supervisor was going to believe me. It's not that it was scary, it was just upsetting. I don't believe her spirit got to pass on. Edit. Fixed a grammar mistake. I had a 6-year-old who fell from a tree and had a significant head injury. She didn't respond to voice commands or painful stimuli, but she was having a conversation with someone. The only part I could clearly hear was when she said, "Well, I know, but I don't want to be dead." She then went unresponsive. Happily, the neurosurgeon was have to get her in the OR in time and take care of her epidural bleed. She survived with mild deficits and came to see us after being discharged. She didn't remember the conversation at all. Student nurse here. I once had a patient say, "Do you ever feel the chill whenever you're on the computer?" Don't worry, it's just a nurse who worked here a long time ago. She doesn't understand your technology, so she's trying to learn. I always feel someone is looking over my shoulder when I'm on the computer, so this freaked me out. Alone in the break room. I would feel the room get cold and then the back of head my hair would be ruffled. Sounds of footsteps in the hallway. Okay, so this wasn't when I was a nurse. I was working transport in the hospital. But I'm a nurse now, so I feel qualified to answer this. I got a call to take a patient to Sono. Keep in mind it's 2 AM and the patient I'm taking has dementia. pretty advanced, so I couldn't really make any conversation. Plus Sono is down this long hallway away from the main part of the hospital, so while this patient is getting her ultrasound it's just me, the patient and the sonotech. So me and the sonotech are making conversation about how creepy hospitals are at night, and I'm telling her about weird noises I hear that I assume are just the tube system, and I ask her about her end of the hospital since it's so secluded, and she says yeah, sometimes people can hear a young girl laughing or a dog barking, but otherwise, nothing major. So about 15-20 minutes goes by with nothing. The patient is sleeping, and then I hear it, the dog barking, and I look at the sonotech and she hears it too. Then the patient's eyes shoot wide open and she starts to sit up, and she goes, "You have to let her out." Keep in mind this girl has not formed a coherent sentence since I've seen her, so of course I did the obvious thing and said, "What?" And she goes, "That little girl in the corner, is that your daughter?" And then she starts mumbling and goes back to sleep. The sonotech cleaned up her stuff and noped TF out, as did I, and we never spoke of it again. Nothing else has happened since, but I still wonder about that patient and how she's doing these days.